attribute is don't do it the way it's always been done, right? If you're the leader and the decisions you make always look like decisions that have already been made, you're probably walking in a circle. And I think that's a big risk. And so what comes along with that as a leader is the unbelievable openness and willingness and almost like active celebration of utter failure all the time. I love saying to my teachers, like, I can't wait for you to go try this and really screw it up. Because two things are going to happen. First, and most importantly, we're going to have one thing that we never have to do again. And secondly, we're going to have a good idea about how to do it better next time. Education's been the way it is for hundreds of years, right? Like, we're now at like 150 years where like the general setup of public education has been the same.
Man, yeah.
Not enough people are screwing it up enough. And then they're not open enough to admit that and then do it differently. And I think that's another leadership attribute, right? Like, you think about the things that make your school great, it's going to be because you didn't do it the way they told you to. Yeah.
So right now you're at Newland Elementary.
Yes.
But that's not where your journey started.
No.
You've been around for a few years. Do you want to share with us where it all started?
I sure will. And so one of the questions I ask when I ask someone to open an interview with me is, how did you arrive in the room today? And when I ask that in an interview, I often have to kind of clarify it by saying, you can tell me how you got here from this morning, how you got into education, or you can say I was born here and let me know how you were led here. Because that tells us a lot about who a person is. And at Newland, our values are so important to us. Knowing someone's story is probably the most important thing towards leading towards whether they'll be a great fit and a member of our community that can lead kids to the future. So I'm going to go fairly far back, and then you can ask any other questions you want.
Yes, please.
I was born in New York, grew up there, lived there till I was about 25. College grad, started a somewhat corporate job, and decided that both New York and corporate were not going to work. And then in deciding to do something different, I said, if you're going to do something different, what would be the exact opposite of corporate New York? And then I went and spent 6 months as an employee at Yellowstone National Park.
That's a change.
That's a change. The story I always tell that kind of connects to that is I slept outside. I went camping with a bunch of folks who were used to the park, and I'm laying out on my sleeping bag looking up, and I'm like, what the heck is that kind of whitish gray streak across the sky? And they're like, dummy, that's the Milky Way. And I'm like, shut up. That's just something you hear in stories. It's like from cartoons. It's not real, and you can't see it. Because for the first 25 years of my life, I hadn't been anywhere that was dark enough for something like the Milky Way to show up. So that was when I really knew I was going to be in a different experience. Living in Yellowstone, kind of through a series of processes, landed me in Winter Park, Colorado. I lived there for 5 years. Very much the ski bum life. The joke I always tell is in 1997, I lived a pretty fun life, 130 days of skiing, 100 days of mountain biking, 6 months on the, 6 weeks on the road in between seasons, camping and all that sort of stuff. And my gross income, how you get that little thing on Social Security, was $7,000. And so, when people would come for a week of vacation, be like, it must be nice to live off someone else's money. I'm like, no, I'm paying this bill myself. And what I earn this year is going to be less than what you paid to do this for 5 days. So who's making the good decision back then? And so after a few years of that, I was about almost 30. And while being a ski bum's fun, being an adult ski bum is both hard, and there's a certain conversation you have to have with someone you're dating about making $6 an hour.
Yes, sir.
And so I had been teaching snowboarding 1 day a week. It's like, working with kids seems kind of fun. And then I just drove down to Denver one day and walked around the Aurora campus. And by accident, I walked into the Metro office first. And I said, I want to become a teacher. So they set me up and they got me started. And I went up taking 60 credits commuting from Winter Park to Denver because I had housing, and became a teacher. Not realizing till like about a week or two before graduation that the 60 undergraduate credits I had gotten and paid for, I could have just as easily gone across the street to the CU Denver office and been a master's degree with a teaching license. But it didn't occur to me for whatever reason. So I have I don't know, like 180 undergrad credits to get a teaching license.
Man, okay.
100% of my experiences were in DPS. My student teaching was in DPS, and I actually became a second grade classroom teacher at Wyman back in 2000, 2001. And so I taught there for 5 years. Amazing experience. Something that'll connect for both of us is it was a small school the whole time. It never had more than 175 kids. My last year as a teacher there, I was the fourth grade teacher and we platooned. So I did math, science, and social studies, and then the other teacher did literacy. And the way that worked is I had third grade in the morning and fourth grade in the afternoon.
Okay.
And then we switched. So they each had one teacher. Then the next year, right before I left, we didn't even have a fourth grade teacher. I was 3-4, and there was a 4-5. So there was legitimately no real fourth grade teacher at the whole school. There were like 6 teachers. And so you learned a lot about teamwork and collaboration. You also learned a lot about, like, when there's 6 people in the school, your committees are pretty small.
Yeah.
Right? So I was the budget committee, myself and the principal. I was on the math committee. I think I was on 3 other ones because with 6 of us.
SLT, ILT, everything.
Basically, that's it. When there's, 10, 12 total licensed staff members, you just teamed up and got it done. About 2 years after I left, it closed. It was part of that Crofton, Del Pueblo, and it closed. It's now DC 21.
Oh, over here, close to downtown, around the...
It's right by East High School. And DC 21 right now, I think it probably pulls a lot of the alternative students from East and maybe even from Manual, because it's right at 17th and Williams.
Gotcha.
Which is also intriguing, because that neighborhood in 2001 was more than 50% of my students were from either Warren Village, which was like the homeless Section 8 housing, or from there was tons of Section 8 housing there along where the hospitals are.
Okay.
I can say my first or my second year, I had 27 kids was my average number of students, but in that single year, I had over 55 different students. Right, because they would just come and go.
How transient.
Very, very transient back then. And so after that, I became a math facilitator at Stedman. And I did that for about, one semester. And during that time, this is when Michael Bennett and Jaime Aquino were in charge, and they were doing specialists. And our neighborhood didn't have one. Okay. And so I kind of got hoodwinked a little bit. So what happened is one of the literacy specialists said, hey, we want you to come down and work with us on something at the central office. And when I got down there, I found out I was interviewing for the staff developer position for the district.
Oh, okay.
And so, this is midway through the year, and so I didn't really apply for anything, but they brought me down and they offered me the job. So I wound up leaving Stedman halfway through the year and becoming an instructional specialist. We've had, dozen names for that in the last 15 years. I did that in 15 schools in the city, but I had Green Valley Ranch, Beach Court, Sabin, and Home were 4 of the 15. Polaris. And so back then when they had the collaboratives are now, you had 15 schools spread across the city. So I was making $170 I was getting about $170 a month in gas recovery because of how far I was driving.
Which probably wasn't enough.
It's hard to remember now. I imagine it was federal rate, so they figured that out somehow, but it was better than nothing. Loved that job and did it for 3 years. But around the midway through the second year, people kept asking me when I was going to finish the Ritchie program. And I would say to them, what is that? I had no idea what it was. But for some reason, everyone thought I was a participant in Ritchie, and that led me to apply. I was like, I'm not in this, but if everyone thinks I'm in it, maybe I should go do it. And so I did that in my last year as a specialist with a lot of really great people. We actually have the 20th anniversary reunion coming up.
November 2nd.
Yes.
I think I'm going to.
Great. What cohort were you?
Ritchie 12.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of great principals, several who are still in the district, which is really fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing them. Johnson was one of the schools that I was a specialist for. And so Cora Gonzalez was the principal there. She had grown up in the neighborhood. She had been a principal in the district. She had been at College View and then at Johnson. And as a specialist, she's like, what are you doing next year? I'm like, I'm going to look for AP jobs. She's like, that sounds great. About a month and a half later, she's like, hey, we're going to have an AP job here next year. Why don't you apply? I was like, also sounds great. Applied for that job, got it, which was really, really exciting because I was, I knew the school was in turnaround. As an intern, I'd worked at all these different schools, and I really felt like my drive wasn't to work at some place that was already working. My drive was to say, like, what's the hardest, most difficult thing you can imagine? Let's go do some work there. And Johnson was the school that was ready but hadn't quite gotten there yet. About a week or two after I started as the AP, she called me in the office. She says, how do you like it? And I said, well, I love it here. She's like, great. I'm retiring at the end of the year. And I said, oh, man.
Wow.
I'm like, I'm going to have to work for someone new. She's like, no, you're not. What I didn't know at the time, what she told me then, is that she had enjoyed working with me, and she wanted me to kind of be the, like, lead-in principal, like the succession principal. But she didn't tell me till after, which was a little scary, super flattering, but I didn't really know what to do with that. So what I did is just work really hard. I spent that year working really hard, and then I was really fortunate. It's always so fun to tell the stories about how old some of us are. Is I interviewed for that job with Jason Krause, right? So he wound up at Smith, and now he's a collaborative director. But like so many of us have been in the district for such a long time, and I respect him so much, and he's really good at what he does. So it's always good when you go interview for jobs, and you're like, oh, if I lose, I don't feel bad because this guy's really good.
Right.
So long story, right? But 6 years at Johnson, we were able to move ourselves out of turnaround. Had a really amazing experience building an expanded learning opportunity school. So that school actually ran from 7 to 7. We had a 70-minute longer school day with some grant funding that kind of de-escalated over time. I don't think Elliott still has expanded day like we did. But again, money matters when it comes to what you do. And then 1 year in central office, I left Johnson when I was like, it's ready. I saw Elliott, right? So Elliott was my AP, and I'm like, Elliott's ready. There's not much more I can do. I felt like I had led for what I could lead for, and so transitioned out. Ivan Duran was my superintendent at the time.
I remember Ivan.
An amazing mentor, really strong, super high expectations, but then gave you what you needed to succeed, and so really helped me grow. And then Student Performance Compact, turnaround schools were all kind of bubbling up. So he invited me out to support and help with that.
Is that the role you had when you left Johnson?
Yeah, I was a principal on special assignment for like turnaround leadership and like school performance development. But then a month after he gave me that job and set me up to work for him, he moved to I think Dallas to become an instructional soup there, or wound up in Washington. I can't remember which order he went, but that was a little scary. But wound up working for Amy Keltner, who was with Susanna, and then had a really good experience. But after just a couple months in Central, I was like, oh, I need to get back to school just in a hurry. So what I did there was really help the district kind of develop a direction for what a turnaround leader should be and how they should go around getting them. Because at the time, what they did is they went to all the Richies and asked, would you do turnaround if offered? And 19 of the 21 said, sure. But of course they would say sure, right? They didn't know.
No, exactly.
I didn't know when I took my AP job at a turnaround school. And what I basically said was, we all know this is crazy that we're putting first year and even second year principals in turnaround schools. Let's stop doing that. So I don't know how much traction that ever got because I still see it happen sometimes. And then the other thing we had to do, as you may remember, like when charters were still much more on the up and coming, we were still opening schools. Anytime a school went into turnaround, any of our local charter networks had a plan that they could just walk right into the board and hand it to them and be ready to open. The district didn't have one. So what they asked me to do was write a school plan. So I, over the course of that year, doing the leadership development, supporting the turnaround schools that were already in that year zero, I did a lot of stuff behind the scenes to support that. But I also wrote a plan. So I brought a plan to the board that got approved. It was called Denver Elementary Community School. And what it was kind of like a stock template so that it lets, but let's say, CMS would go into turnaround, and they're going to do the close and reopen. As the leader, you could walk in and pick this plan up, and it would be 60 to 70 to 80% of what you might need from a systemic structural point of view. And then you say, I'm going to tune this to dual language. I'll tune it to Montessori. I'll tune it after I get feedback from the community. But setting up special education or an MTSS process, you don't necessarily need to start from scratch.
Right.
So by building that, it was on the shelf. Arguably then, the next turnaround school that came when Strive or Rocky Mountain Prep walked up with their plans are all out of the box, right? They're the same every time. That the district would have a competitive option right at the start, which was a lot of work. But then at the end of the year, I finished that, right? That next fall, they stopped the school performance compact, and it basically stopped being relevant. So I got an amazing experience because I learned how to open a school.
Right. Wow.
But it didn't actually lead to anyone ever using it, which I'm sad about, and I'm glad they're not doing turnaround the same way. That led me to, so around January, I went to see Susanna, and I've known her for years. She was like my literacy coach back when I was a teacher, just about. Right? Like,
wow.
Maybe not my coach. I guess she was like the district specialist kind of a person. Maybe she was a head of humanities. But back then, the person in charge of humanities would actually teach the professional development to teachers, right? Like, just it felt like a smaller group then. And I went in, and she's like, well, here are the schools that are open. And so there were like 12 on the list. The first joke was Bromwell at the time happened to have been open. I'm like, oh, I'll go there. She's like, she laughed at me. She's like, no, you won't.
Really?
I'm like, why not? She's like, I know you well enough to know that you're not going to be happy there. She's like, here's two others. And at the time, it was Colfax and Newland.
Okay.
And so through the interview process, Newland turned out to be my home.
Gotcha.
And so I've been there for this is year 6.
6 years.
So yeah, I mean, it's a long way into the journey, but at 22 years in teaching, it kind of takes a while to get there.
To me, this is the coolest story, man. What a search. You started in New York, corporate world, moved to Yellowstone, get to see the Milky Way, which I haven't seen the Milky Way yet, by the way. I'm from the Andes in Venezuela, in the Venezuelan Andes, the mountains. So long story short, the skies are beautiful, but I don't think you can see the Milky Way from
the northern hemisphere, I guess, or something.
Something like that. But then you went to Winter Park. I'm kind of jealous of it, man. I love snowboarding.
Let me make you a little bit more angry. So where I did up there, have you ever skied in Winter Park?
Once.
So did you remember there's a big, gorgeous, giant wooden mountain lodge at the top of the mountain?
Yeah, of course.
That was my house.
Oh, man.
So for 5 years, I was the caretaker for that building. So what I would do is, you would go ski. I'd be out skiing with you all day long.
And
at 4 o'clock, staff has to leave because the chairlift shuts down, mountain closes. You leave because you're done with your ski day. Someone has to clean the place.
Wow.
So I work from like 4 to midnight, cleaning, go to bed, wake up at 7:30, push my curtain. If it was good snow,
go.
And that was the way I'd spend my days.
Ski or snowboard?
Snowboard.
Snowboard. That's what I do.
Yeah. And so it was hard, right? 5 years of, low consequence living, right? Like food, housing, everything was covered.
Yeah.
Living, doing fun stuff every day.
Wow.
But you get to a point where you're like, oh, man, this is not quite adulting yet.
Yes. Yep. I'm obsessed with snowboarding. It's one of the things that I do that I really love, which is funny because Venezuela doesn't have snow. Yeah. There's only one glacier that is probably the size of a football field, the Pico Bolivar. I grew up in foster care, kind of like boarding school, and it was located right in front of the mountains. So I felt really privileged. I always have this deep love for mountains.
Was that part of your connection to get to Colorado? Like, was it a mountain town was part of your drive to come here?
Because I grew up in foster care, the boarding school was a religious organization that took kids at risk.
Okay.
So when I graduated salutatorian.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And they gave me a scholarship to go to the capital of the country. And I wanted to be in the seminar to become a priest. So I spent 4 years in the seminar. Oh, wow. And when I graduated from college, I wanted to go to Spain because my passion is Spanish literature, from the golden age Spanish literature. Okay. I was 21. So I wasn't lucky going there, but CU Boulder took three of us from the same university. So I ended up coming here because of that. But my connection with the mountains was always there, I guess, from my childhood. I used to run and bike. So when I got here, by accident, I was like, gosh, I love this. So living there, man, for 5 years, year-round, right?
Yes. Again, it's just, I can't believe it when I say it. So, like, yes, but in the summer, right, in the summer, buddy of mine, we used to, because they have employee housing out in town.
Yes.
And no one's there in the summer, so it's cheap. So in the summer, we paid $165 a month to get a condo in town, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, because it also had a pool. So we were willing to pay the extra $160. And then if you didn't want to have to, because in the winter you had to drive home at night up the mountain road. And so, like, if you were out at the local bar, you'd just rather walk home to this place or catch the local bus. But if you wanted to get back up the mountain, unsafe. So it was almost like, again, we were living on $7 an hour, but we had 2 homes in the town just because it was convenient. Like, it is, I almost don't believe it when I say it these days. It was such a lucky situation.
That's so cool. It also enriched a little bit your vision, because I think when you get to a point where you're like high 20s or low 30s and you're like, what else do I want to do with my life? You probably already burned all those wild adventures and all those things. Like, you're like, check, I'm matured, I'm ready to take on a grown-up job or something like that.
I think there's a lot to that. I've got a 14 and a 16-year-old, and so as I think about now, growing up in New York, and for lots of reasons, like, I think we talked about family, like the way my parents' lives were and the way they wanted me to go high school, college, job, right? Like, that was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. That's how it worked. So that's what I did. But now, I don't know that I really am going to make my daughter make that, like, you must go to college right out of high school. For much the same reasons. I went to college right out of high school. My parents and I spent a good amount of money to pay for that college.
Yeah.
And then I didn't do anything with it, right? Like, I went 7 years and then went back to paid again to then do, because then I knew, or at least I thought I knew what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. So, like, if you do the same job from the day you graduate from college at 21, you're going to do the same thing for like 47 straight years. That's a long time.
That's a long time.
Do one thing. So I think that for kids today, I think the college experience is still super important. But how fast they get to it, I think there's a new way to potentially look at it.
Yeah, and the cost benefit of it too, because you are at age 18, you have to make a decision that is going to compromise the rest of your life, both financially and professionally. Because then if you change your mind, it's going to be another burden of price, which you paid. You had to go through it twice.
No. And again, it worked out, right? Like, I'm not,
Right.
There's no regrets in how it worked out for me. But it is to just maybe, I think the difference today is, like, I didn't have a choice. Like, I really wasn't given one. I mean, it was basically the military or college. But take a couple years off and figure it out. That wasn't part of the equation. I think it's fair to students today, to children today, to my own kids, like, you have to want it. It can't be because I want it.
When you made that change of leaving the mountains, coming here, becoming an educator, do you have any leader role models that you saw and got inspired by, and any people that, you know?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. The principal at that school, African-American woman, strong person, strong-willed, ran the school in a very traditional way. The principal says people do. And to a certain extent, a lot of us were young. A lot of us were new, and that's really what we needed. And so what I saw by watching her leadership was there are moments when the leader just needs to say things, and things then need to happen. But I also saw that that was the only tool in her toolbox.
Got it.
And so I can honestly say, I'm thinking now, there were at least, now I only worked there for 5 years, and I can name 6 of my fellow educators who became leaders, and at least in some way said to me, I became a leader so I could do it differently. Now, I don't mean that that's what that principal did was not right or good, but what we all saw was there was more room in the leadership way than what we were seeing from her leadership. I would work with her again. if she was to be a leader again. But she just did it differently.
And that's one of the greatest things about leadership is that when you really pay attention, you can learn also from those people that you don't want to be like. And sometimes those lessons are even more powerful because as you describe that experience, I am thinking of 2 other people that I have also worked with or worked for that gave me a painful experience. And it was a clear line of, okay, this is exactly what I do not want to become, or this is exactly the situations I don't want to be in as I grow as a leader. Which makes me wonder, what do you think the attributes of a great leader are? If you were to build a great leader, what would you invest on?
I think, and this has been a journey for me my whole career, is like the idea of listening. Any of our friends in the leadership business that know me, Nestor, know that that's not always my strongest skill. I'm very passionate about what we do. I love the organization we work for, and I have a lot to say about that. But I find myself being the most successful when listening leads the way. And I think that's like the first like leadership attribute is even if you don't listen all the time, when you do it well. I think that's important. Like I said, I love being on that listening journey because again, it's hard for me. I get excited.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
I agree, but knowing your work and listening to you and being in for years. I left the elementary world, went to high school, and I didn't see you for a couple of years, but then I came back to elementary, and I feel lucky to be around you and listening to you. I agree with the listening piece, but also what you have to contribute when you talk and when you share your ideas, that's inspiring, man. Like you really see things outside of the box, and I think you try. And even when you don't try, I think that your perspective, the angle, the position from where you're looking at the world is so unique. It's so cool that sometimes I don't even care if you're right or wrong. I just want to know what Rob is thinking because you give me a different perspective. So I think it's really special, that gift that you have. So sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to point that out too.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. It really does. So I think that what you're hitting on in that is, I think, another leadership attribute is don't do it the way it's always been done, right? If you're the leader and the decisions you make always look like decisions that have already been made, you're probably walking in a circle. And I think that's a big risk. And so what comes along with that as a leader is the unbelievable openness and willingness and almost like active celebration of utter failure all the time. I love saying to my teachers, like, I can't wait for you to go try this and really screw it up. Because two things are going to happen. First, and most importantly, we're going to have one thing that we never have to do again. And secondly, we're going to have a good idea about how to do it better next time. Education's been the way it is for hundreds of years, right? Like we're now at like 150 years where like the general setup of public education has been the same.
Man, yeah.
Not enough people are screwing it up enough. And then they're not open enough to admit that and then do it differently. And I think that's another leadership attribute, right? Like you think about the things that make your school great. It's going to be because you didn't do it the way they told you to, and whoever they is for you. I think really strong leaders. I think about some of the people you've talked to already. Like I've looked at kind of looking at the list of who you're going to talk to. I'm like, one of the things I think that they all share, including yourself, is like these are people who, when we're in rooms, are saying no to they more often than the people who you haven't invited yet. Do you agree with that? Like when you think about the people you've spoken to, Jamie and Rebecca and Shane, Michelle, like they don't say, I'll just do whatever they tell me to do. They're often saying no. What are your thoughts? Like, does that connect for you?
100%. And I think those people are the courageous ones. I always see them in the front of the line, going somewhere. And sometimes I don't know where they're precisely going, but I just like the fact that they're not in the line with everybody else. And that to me, that's really, really important, because that tells me that you are not regurgitating an ideology or a way that you think that things should be done dogmatically. Like, you're exploring, you're taking risks. So yeah, and I've learned that about myself. I think that's how I get to respect, admire, love, appreciate people, is when I see them exploring, when I see them touching things, buttons that otherwise would have gone unseen or unspoken, unchallenged. Yep. Jamie said, when you get to listen to Jamie Roybal, shout out to you, Jamie, she said something I loved. She said, I'm a positive deviant. Positive deviant. That's how she describes herself. I didn't know what it meant. And she was like, I like to contradict and disagree with people in a positive way. She says that, well, you guys can listen to her episode, but she said something like, I kind of enjoy finding a way that hasn't been seen yet. Yeah, she kind of likes to disagree. So to me, that's very important. Yeah.
I really appreciate that idea. Positive deviant. That's useful. I think the other thing, like, to kind of connect that, right? It's one thing to do things other people haven't done. The other thing I see in leaders that are really successful is that a willingness to take a risk, but not be reckless, right? Like, it's one thing to go out there and go, I'm not going to do it the way everyone else has done it. But then if you're challenged and say, well, then what are you going to do? The quality of what comes next is what gives that person what I think is likely future successes. It's one thing to be like, I'm going to go the other direction. But to throw the map over your shoulder as you just wander off into the wilderness, that's reckless. And we have kids' lives at stake, literally. Mm-hmm. It's okay to take a risk, but don't be reckless in that risk-taking. I think needs to be, you need to bring the playbook of good leadership with you.
Yeah.
We all know that we've all been around leaders who are like, they come into a school, they tell you everything's going to change because of what they think, but they haven't thought yet, right? Like, there's a difference between thinking and thought. Thinking is an idea. Thought is building the idea. I think good leaders build the idea. They get that wild idea, and then they do the work to bring it to life. I think that's a difference.
That hits home for me, because one of the feedback that I've been receiving on my own leadership is I'm very passionate and my values are very clear. So when I see things going on ways that I disagree with, and you and I were sitting at a conversation about charters where you saw me profoundly disagreeable. One of the people that I talked to, which you were one of the people I talked to, by the way, but another person that I talked to, he gave me this feedback that was very valuable, and is what you're talking about, like, take the risk, but don't be reckless. He shared with me, always follow your values, always, that's your compass, but when you express them, when you express your disagreement or your frustration, make sure that you're causing the impact that you want to have instead of being reckless, in the sense of, I could have kept going on and on when I was very upset, but I guess immaturity or not being well seasoned enough on my own leadership, it's like, at some point you make your point only about what you have to say, instead of measuring the impact or the positive outcome that you want to get out of it. And I think when you say take the risk and don't be reckless, it takes me to that point where everything we say will have an impact on others, and the impact can be a calculated risk that allows others to grow, or it can just be like, oh, this guy is just nuts.
Well, yeah, you need a little nuts every now and then, right? It needs to be a little bit crazy every now and then. But I think you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought values into the equation, because I think that's the last, without question, I think that values are leadership. And I think it's, again, we hear it in all of the research in the books, like, as a leader, you need to have a strong set of personal values. Mm-hmm. But I think it's that end, recognizing when your values either align or don't align with the community you're about to serve. And I've had a really amazing approach. I think there's 7 DPS principles that have either been Richie's for me or AP's for me, or Rebecca as a teacher leader for me. And the one thing I always said, like, when you're going for the job, don't go for a job as a leader. Go for the job as a leader. If you're going to put an application in at every elementary school in DPS, you're going to fail. because you'll get a job. But are those values aligned? And it doesn't necessarily mean that like you go to a school where you have to look like every other kid, like the kids there, or every teacher there, or that it's exactly like how you were brought up. But values are values. If empowerment's a value, if harmony is a value, those are two of the ones at Newland, and that's community's values are those, then you're on the right track. But if their values are something else and they don't match yours, someone's going to have to change, and that's not necessarily how leadership should work, right? Like, if you're going to lead a community and be new to the community, you have to respect who they are. That's like, you can't argue that, right? So if I'm going to move into your community and become the leader of your children, and I don't share your values, we're not going to be able to without unbelievable amounts of work, almost more work than probably is feasible considering all the other things a leader has to do in an elementary school or any school. You got to give yourself permission to go, not this one, not right now. And I think that's important for a leader. It can be it can be the fights you fight, right? Like to your point about where your passion goes. If you're going to jump into a fight, it can just sometimes be just to be rough and tumble, to be reckless, to kind of put your idea out there. But if you're going to walk back away from it, that's not your values aren't in it. And then I would say, don't go. Pick the right one. Pick the one where your values and your passion really come together. Because at first, then you'll be able to project that. Like it'll come out. And then people will follow to a certain extent. I don't like the word follow because I don't share that value. Like leaders shouldn't be followed. Leaders should be behind. So yeah, I think values are immensely important. And that alignment is immensely important.
Yeah. What you said about leaders shouldn't be followed, they should be behind. It reminds me of a quote I read last week that was super powerful. It says, if you want to inspire people, don't show them how amazing you are. If you want to inspire people, show them how amazing they are. Yeah. Another one is like build a team so strong that nobody can point out the leader, because everybody, I believe in one of the greatest attributes of a leader is your ability to empower others, to give them the skills, just like Ivan Durant probably did with you.
Yeah. How fast can you become useless to the organization?
Yeah.
That's your goal.
That's a great way.
An amazing principle. The faster you can become useless, right? Doesn't mean you're not important. It doesn't mean you couldn't find something to do. But the faster you can move a community, you can build a community where you're no longer needed. Wanted, great. Wanted's a whole different thing. But most often, very often, when you come to a school as a new leader, they need something from you. Something about direction, something about vision, mission, something about skill. But the faster you can embed that in the life of the school, and you're no longer needed but wanted, that's when the momentum will really pick up, and that's when the school can grow and expand. One of the things I kind of talk through with mentees and stuff when I work with is like these 4 stages of anything that we do. Stage number 1 is efficacy, right? Like I'll talk about it from the position of like a new principal. Efficacy is, can I do the job? Is the job being done effectively? Is the school operating effectively? Now, at that time, you're probably needed, right? You're working 50, 60, 100 hours a week, whatever it is. But efficacy is happening. The next thing is, right, capacity. Can they do the job, right? Can the folks who need to do the work, students and teachers, or organizationally, whatever organization, can they do the job? You're still working pretty hard as the leader, right? Because having them do the job involves you leading that. Next is sustainability, right? At sustainability, they're doing the job, and you're now not needed, you're wanted. So now you're casting the vision 6 months ahead, a year ahead, lighting it up, and they know how to get to it. So like when you cast that next bit of vision in that sustainability model, you're no longer like day-to-daying. You're not, the radio calls, there's something going on in the cafeteria. You don't even need, you might pick it up because you want to go spend some time, but you don't, it's happening. You know that the right person's going to go restore, support, follow through. You're good. The last one is legacy, right? Legacy happens when you leave and you come back 2 years later and it's still moving forward, right? So leadership, right? It's the path of leadership again, this is opinion. Right. It should always be that. You should always be aiming for that legacy piece insofar as you've distributed leadership, you've elevated people in ways that honor and empower them. Dignity, humanity, all come in that, because then they see that they could always have done it. They just weren't doing it yet, right? It's that growth mindset.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes.
I think that's the most fun part of my job is not doing it, right? Like, because when you walk around, you see something happening, like, when did that start happening? I didn't tell anyone to do that. That's really good. I didn't even know they were doing that. Does that mean you do, like, it's like some leaders, I can't believe you did that without me. Well, that's just, hurt feelings. Yeah. Get over yourself. Is it good for kids? Yes. Could you have thought of it as leader? Yeah, probably. Did you? No. Be prouder of that than you not having the idea in the first place, because you created a space where good ideas both flourish and come to life without you. I think that's super, I don't know that's the important part of leadership. That's the fun part.
Yeah. When
things like that happen. Like, if we were to go walk around your building right now, I would be surprised if we didn't find some of that. I would be shocked if we didn't, because the way you do your job, I can't imagine that these teachers and educators you work with and the students don't know that the risk of doing something you didn't give them permission for will always be honored versus challenged. And 100%. That's the only way our schools are going to succeed, if that's the culture.
100%. Oh man, I love this. What I hear also in between lines, or what the noise that I hear behind what you're saying, is also, as a leader, you have a healthy relationship with your ego, and you're very clear in your humility, because you understand that it's not about you. You understand that there is something greater than you that is taking place that must continue long after you're gone.
100%.
That's beautiful. And that's exactly, I don't think I could have to articulate that about myself better than what you're saying it, because that's exactly how I live it. Which takes me also to the symbolic element, the symbolic aspect of what we do as leaders. We are, culturally, we're very symbolic for our communities. That starts with how we handle ourselves and the things we do, but also how others interpret us. Do you notice some of that in your own leadership, like the symbolic element?
Yeah, and I think what we're going to start to head into is some of the equity stuff, because I think, as you may know about my career, is it's not been in schools where I am part of the community majority.
Right.
So the first thing I would say is, like, that idea of when you think about how you look in the space, that idea of losing the ego. I say this to my coaches all the time. Remember, Michael Jordan had a coach, right? And I mean, as a sports person, you've probably heard that 100 times, but in the education context, it really has to be driven home. When I enter the room as the school's principal, I am almost certainly, in every conversation, not the most knowledgeable person. As a matter of fact, if I'm doing my job well, I'm definitely not, because I've created the space for you to be the expert, the best at this, and it's not what I do, right? And so, like, what I want to put in the space is that humility about going, my job is to remove the things that keep you from being the best at what you do, and from the bench, moving that arm, that elbow out an inch so you can hit the shot. I can see things you can't see because I get to sit where you don't have the time and space to sit. I also, especially in education, I have the privilege of watching hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shots being taken. So in my gift, right, and I don't mean that I'm gifted, it's the gift I receive by being a principal, is the collection of this works, this doesn't, that works, this doesn't. And so when I watch you, it's easier for me than it is for yourself to move through all those. And I think that's to, like, how I'm perceived in the community is like that. I also think about understanding, like, remembering as parents, I think this is where being principals, I am sure there are principals who are far more skilled than I am that don't have kids of their own. But one of the things, I had this happen 2 days ago. I'm in my office, and I can hear screaming, like angry, really angry parent, just screaming. And my secretary's like, I need help. So I come out, and this person's can't even look at me. They're yelling so much. And all I say is, I'd like you to come in my room. Come into my office. She comes in, I close the door, and I say, would you like to sit? I am not going to sit, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but she's mad. And I sit down, and I just do what I think all good principals. I listen, and I listen, and I listen, and about 3 times in the conversation, she said, is this school racist? And all I said was, I don't think so, right? Now, again, the first thing I don't want to do is say, no, that's impossible. That dishonors her. She's clearly feeling that way right now. But I haven't heard everything yet. I may hear something that I don't think so gives her permission that I haven't made a decision yet. So that her what she's saying has value. She refused to sit for about 10 or 15 minutes. And every time I was about to start talking, so I didn't try to get over her. And in the end, when I said, would you like to help me solve this now?
Wow, that's powerful.
Right? And in the end, what I said to her, and this is, I think every principal needs to remember to say this when a parent's angry, is at the end of the conversation, what I believe you should always say is, thank you so much. Right? I'm going to get choked up because this means a lot to me. Thank you so much, because too many parents never come in. When you come in this angry, that anger is love. If you don't love your kid that angry, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And so I say to them, if you're that angry, that means you love them that much, which means we're going to solve this together because I want what you want. If we take that anger as they're mad at me, the principal who didn't do it right, you miss the entire point. Yeah. They're a parent. They only scream at you because they truly believe that they're doing what's best for their kid. They're just not doing it as well as some other people might choose to. Right. Although, if that's what works, I need to honor that. I can invite, what I said at the end is like, hey, next time you feel like this, come on in. I'm ready. We know each other now. Just come to me. I get paid to get yelled at. They don't. I'm the one that's going to solve your problem. They're going to help me. So you really have to lead in that way. And again, went out to my secretary, she's like, oh, that was hard. I said, well, and now I've worked with my team for why was it hard? She's like, she's having a tough time. She's like, there's things going on for her that I'd be angry about too. Yeah. I said, who was she yelling at? She's like, she was yelling at her problem. She wasn't yelling at me. Right. And so when you have a community of educators who can understand that, and then they project out, that's what I think, like when you say, like, what is your leadership? Like, what does it look like? It's that my office secretary was able to say empathetically, oh, I know she wasn't yelling at me. She, like some of our friends would be like, it was about them. Right. She knew that she's not yelling at me. She's yelling at the challenges she has that prevent her from doing what she wants to do for her own child.
Wow.
And I think, again, family engagement can really be around that, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that anyone wants to show up at their school of their student and do that. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why would anyone do that? Because they want what's best.
That gave me goosebumps, man. That is a deep level of understanding of your community, your families, and also enough maturity to detach the yelling and the emotion that this parent is feeling and not taking it personally. I think in many other cases, people will call safety and security and withdraw the parent and give him a letter to never come back to my building because you're being unprofessional. I've seen that take place.
And we see how that goes, right? That's the admin transfer that comes in hot to your school, and you don't quite know why, right? It's tough. But again, I think it translates to kids too, right? Like this is something that I think you probably have already heard from other principals. It's like at our school, because we've done so much work in social emotional learning, what I say to our team is like, always remember that the act of walking through the front door of Newland by a child can almost always, every day, one of them is committing a heroic act to simply get through the front door. Yeah. So whatever they do once they get in here, remember, we don't know what act of heroism, what World War II, Saving Private Ryan type experience they've had to get here today. So the least we can do is always presuppose that the decisions they make once they get here are directly related to what it took to get here. And if you take it as they're mad at you, you're gonna get exactly what you want, which is they're gonna stay mad at you. But if you take it as they wanted to show up here as their best selves, and this is all they have to offer us today, what are you gonna offer them? Right? Like,
100%. And it also, this is just a perfect setup. I think you're you're defining the core of equity as you describe those two situations, the parent and the kids, the courage, the heroic effort that it takes to show up through those doors in the morning, and having a teacher that's ready to love them too. Wow. So when you think of equity and you think of those families, what other elements can you add to develop a more, diverse picture of what equity might be for you?
So this is this is work where we are as a school in, and I certainly am in as well, is like, first things first is I have to recognize where I sit in the equity equation, right? In that equity circle. There is virtually no more privilege than the privilege I live in, right? I grew up on the East Coast. I'm a man. I'm affluent, right? Now that I'm a principal. I don't think affluence was how I described myself back when I was a kiddo. My upbringing wasn't affluent, but...
Winter Park, yeah, $7 an hour, not exactly affluent. But I had a family, and I had that. So that's the thing, right? Like, I could live in Winter Park on $7 an hour because if I got fired on a Tuesday, somebody could have probably sent me a plane ticket on Wednesday. Yeah. Totally different situation, right? Like, I can... When I was younger and I was not as aware, I would talk like that. Well, I had to live on $7,000 a year. But what sat right behind me isn't the same as for someone else. Maybe for yourself, right? Like when you're in foster care, I can't imagine there was a lot of a security behind you every day. It's constant fear. You need approval. You need.
I forgot that, right? At 25, I didn't connect to that. As a 51-year-old leader in a community of color where 91% of the students qualify for free lunch, my first thing is to go, wait a minute. Your good ideas don't align with their reality most of the time. So this goes back to what we're talking before, time to listen. And the other thing is, if you've distributed leadership well, which I hope I have, right? Are we where we want to be as far as the educators of color in our building? Not yet. Better than some, not as good as many. But then I decenter. Mm-hmm. Yuri and I were in a fellowship last year, and we really worked on family and community engagement. And the decision I made was, I shouldn't say I made, the decision we made, because this is truly was a collaborative decision, is she is our family and community engagement person.
Judy?
Yeah, absolutely. And because some schools have nothing, right? Like somebody does it, but it's not a job. Yeah. Some schools have a para. Some schools have a pro-tech. Some schools even have a licensed teacher. Mm-hmm. Ours is the AP. What are we trying to project to the community? Is very much, we value you enough to in a silly way to put it, like the second most prestigious person in the building's primary focus is you, the community. By doing that, I can then step away, right? And it doesn't mean I don't lead. We're saying like, I'm leading. I'm this is another thing I guess I'll throw out there at this point, but like, Yuri's leading in an integrated, thoughtful way, right? So like, if we need to do an intervention, the teacher's going to communicate with the family, but Yuri's also going to make sure that the community knows that that's happening. And so really looking at how engagement increases motivation and then belonging. Yeah. So what I want to hit on is like, as the leader, I think one of the ways I always like to describe this to folks is like, you have to remember that you're in a good relationship with a student, a parent, a colleague, if we remember that we are in service to each other, not servants of each other. right? If you think about it from the point of view of like when a parent comes in and when a parent says to you, if you don't, then I will. Right? If you don't do this, then I'm going to pull my kid. If you don't do this, I'm not going to donate. If you don't do this, I'm going to call face. That's servant. They're snapping their fingers at you. And what you want to switch the conversation to is when I've been in this situation, right? When a teacher says to me, if you don't do this, then I'm going to leave. I'll say, when do you want me to write your letter? Because I want to help you fix the problem, but I'm not going to negotiate it from the point of view as if I don't do something, then you will do something. And I think that kind of like thinking it through to its logical extreme, that creates service, not servitude, right? And so circling it back to equity, in all of your relationships, you want to align with service, right? Our families... And I want to kind of be careful here because the word servant can get a little bit misconstrued. Yeah. Like when our families come to a carnival, we are serving them at the carnival. We're not in service to them. When they come for a literacy night, we're in service. So when you work on family and community engagement, it's not that we can't have a carnival, but it's a different thing. It's not going to create belonging and relationship in the same way because it's transactional. So families, right? Literacy night, I'm transforming because I'm learning about, if I'm doing it right, I'm learning about their experience as a reader and I'm transforming how they support their child with reading. Transformative. It's hard to do that on movie night.
Yeah.
And so it's remembering that. And then also as a leader in equity, relationships. If I'm going to have, I don't know, what's an example? We're all going to read a book. We're going to read White Fragility. Read the book, answer the questions. Transactional, right? I'm going to do something for the community. The community's going to do something for our kids. Transformational is doing something with it. Inviting family to be part of that book study, right? Like that changes the equation. And I think when I think about equity, what I have to always be aware of is what I said earlier, is like, I should not be leading the equity conversation, ever, right? Like, at least not for the next foreseeable couple of years, right? We're going to have to transform our communities of culture significantly before it's appropriate for me to be leading those conversations. But what I can be doing is fighting to make sure those conversations are happening and that nobody slows us down, right? It's the obstacle removal. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. What connections can you make between equity and Black excellence? Are they connected? Is one inside the other?
I don't know. I don't feel qualified to answer, right? Like I'm going to maybe disclose first, like I'm not Black, right? I do believe in equity. The way I've said it, and I suspect I would welcome feedback from anyone who wants to give it to me, is like, what I would say is like, when we don't have to have a Black excellence plan, we're heading towards equity, right? Like when there is no need for a Black excellence plan, when it's an excellence plan, and in the design of both the system and in the understanding and in the outcome, an excellence plan is indistinguishable from a labeled excellence plan. That's, now again, that's being realistic. Rob's not expecting that to happen 3 years from now.
Right.
5 years from now, 10 years from now. But if I want to cast that vision again, all the way out there, the absence of a need to label the plan and then authentically be able to say, all will benefit, we might be closer to equity than we are now.
That's amazing. I never thought of it that way, but it definitely makes a lot of sense. And when you're talking about like 2, 3, 5 years and that hopeful dreaming of the future, hoping that things obviously improve and the landscape becomes more inclusive and diverse and loving, I think at the end of the day, it's about seeing ourselves in others and loving them as much as we love ourselves. But when you look at that future, what other things would you like to see changed in our educational system before you die, before your time on earth is over?
I know I told you before we started that I'm going to say everything. But, so I'll start by saying, like, if we changed everything, how much worse off would we be?
How much more what?
How much worse off would we be?
Oh.
If we literally said, throw everything we're currently doing away and start over, how much worse off would we be? We haven't gotten it right.
Yeah,
we haven't gotten it right yet, right? No one would claim that what we're doing now is absolutely working. We're hopeful, but we're not there. I think two things. One is I think the will to take risks beyond the building. I want to tread lightly here because I want to make sure I say this in ways that are honoring of everybody. But as we talked about small schools, this came up. As a matter of fact, I think Rebecca mentioned it in hers. We're all worried about which schools are going to open and which schools are going to close. And what we're doing is we're looking at it from the smallest possible decision rather than the biggest possible decision. And so, yes, there's 10,000 less students, right? What if we decided to start with the district as a whole and say, how many schools would we need to serve all students well? Is it 100? Is it 75? Is it 50? Once you decide on how many, then build communities to serve. Instead of saying what we already have works, we just need less of it. Or opposed to saying nothing we have works, let's start over. Right? You're taking what already exists and you're picking things off of it. I'm saying take the whole thing, toss it in the trash heap, and come back and say, well, we weren't super psyched with how things were going to begin with. If we started over and we said, yeah, how many high schools do we need? How many ECE centers do we need? Okay. Now take every name off every school. All we now have is real estate and children. Build it back better, right? What's the harm? How could we be worse?
Oh my God, that is so powerful.
But here's the
messy
thing.
Too.
Yeah, try to get 1 million people in a city to agree, right? And here it goes back to equity, because in that change, lots of people are going to lose power, control, influence. What kind of people do you think are going to lose that? The people who already have a lot of it, right? So that's the challenge, right? And this is not a Denver thing. This concept works just about everywhere, right? It's in order for us to level the playing field, right? The equity boxes, right? You know, those little, one kid gets to stand on the box and someone will perceive that they have to give something up. And that's the other kind of systemic issue if we can change in education, is that the pie can get bigger, right? The learning can get bigger. To more practically speaking, is how might a student with a school with 6% free lunch get better if it was a situation where it got reconfigured to be one with 30? Right now, I don't think communities can see that having to have a different makeup of their school could add. It doesn't have to take away. So many colors that appear to have power, adding less powerful students to the equation in the traditional sense takes power away rather than enhances or grows it. The pie stays the same size, right? The amount of benefit is fixed. So any change where it's perceived that you're giving up means that you're losing. But if we can rethink it and say, by mixing things up, everybody gets more, I think it's possible. But a lot of people would have to be convinced first.
A lot of people have to be convinced first, and for every person that needs to be convinced, probably 100 questions have to be answered. Because then we start talking about, okay, what kind of resources are going to relocate? Are we going to relocate the real estate to make sure that it is appropriate to allocate this amount of children and families in each building? And then we'll start talking about, how about curriculum? How about after-school programs? How about the amount of teachers? How about the ratio of student per teacher? I just love the idea of changing everything, because what do we have to lose? obviously, schools like CMS is a symbol in the community. When our families and CMS families are very, very passionate and attached to the culture of the school, I bet same as Newland, when they feel they're going to lose this, they are losing something that's symbolic as well. And that's like the sacred piece of.
But I would argue, so like this is something we've been talking about, Yuri and I have been talking about a lot, is they're socially constructed communities already. Mm-hmm. The CMS community is only defined by a map that they keep at the central office. Mm-hmm. And that central office map wasn't created by people that look like you or mm-hmm. your families. Mm-hmm. West Side's a community.
Yeah.
Lincoln High School's a community.
Mm-hmm.
So your families in and of themselves are communities inside communities inside communities. Mm-hmm. Strong leadership is what builds the community.
100%.
Right? So like if tomorrow, Nestor, Dr. Moreau said, Rob, CMS and Newland are going to consolidate. I have no fear that the community that would end would be stronger mm-hmm. and that our families mm-hmm. would know it and understand it and be part of it. Mm-hmm. But it's not the one they have today.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the decision the community makes through good leadership and through good stewardship that makes the community itself. So like being bound by my school boundary is like giving in, at least to me, giving in to, you didn't choose that boundary. Your families didn't choose that boundary. White guys in the 50s chose that boundary.
Which have been sabotaged all throughout the process by putting schools in that boundary that have no boundaries, that are creating a competition among each other.
100%. And so as we go to what's next, that's the argument we're kind of putting out there. You, I think, have been very strong about it from the charter point of view, right? Like, you're intentionally pitting communities kind of at odds with each other mm-hmm. transactionally, mm-hmm. right? Because each kid has a value. It's a transactional relationship. Mm-hmm. If you and the charter, this is not how it's designed, but if you and I decided tomorrow and we went to that and said, we're going to, now we don't share boundaries. This is not practically realistic, but it's not impossible either, mm-hmm. right? Let's make something silly up. Let's say you're dual language K2, I'll be dual language 3.5. Mm-hmm. But we showed our communities how we were going to transform their child's lives, improve the quality of the education they got, and the consequence of that is that some of your kids will have to take a bus for a few years. But here's what we will do for you, with you, directed by you. You could lead for that. You're that kind of leader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'm hoping that there's leaders above us who are willing to take those kinds of risks, mm-hmm. even if it means not getting reelected, not getting perfect scores on something, or having someone tell you that they don't like you. And that's what it's going to take, right?
Yeah.
What do you when you think about the future of CMS, right, and equity, what do you think would be a success indicator that the school community as a whole has made the kind of progress you're hoping for?
Success indicators?
Yeah. What shows up? I visit you 2 years, 3 years from now, and I go do a walk. What am I going to see or hear that would say, that I come back to say, I saw this and I heard this, that you would say, we're making the progress I wanted to make?
The idea of giving kids the empowerment to explore their own identities, to be self-sufficient, the ability to enter a classroom and see evidence that these kids are interdependent, that they have skills that they will enrich each other. Watching that in a second, third, fourth grade classroom, 100% of the kids, and the teacher is, just like you said as the principal, I am not needed. The teacher is also not needed with regards to how learning happens. It's more as a facilitator. I think that will be a great indicator. The ownership and interdependency on kids. On a technical side, I think having over 99% of attendance every day, having caseloads, manageable mental health caseloads, having 4 social workers for a school of 300 kids, it's a human right. Having class sizes of 10 to 12 kids per teacher. I want to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah. We talked about it off camera.
I know.
all those things materialistically, operationally, and instructionally should be aligned to set up every kid to be independent, to own their own learning, and to be seen, loved, and cared for. And currently, I don't think you can truly see, love, and care for 35 kids stuffed in a classroom on a 2-year teacher, or in a high school when you have 5 periods of 175 children in a day. It's hard for me to reconcile equity, diversity, inclusion, when contractually we have made it okay to have 35 kids in a room.
Yeah, I think, like we were talking about, I don't disagree fundamentally in the idea of like 35 kids creating that sense of belonging, love, inclusion. That's going to be Herculean and probably not productive. Like, it's not really going to happen. What I flipped to in our conversation was, just because there are 12 kids in the room doesn't mean anything's necessarily going to change. So I would say class size can be a proxy for change. It is not the change in and of itself. And so what do you expect of the person and the students when they have the voice and the space to have the voice, I guess is a better way to say it. So if I invite a teacher who has 35 kids to have 15, I would love to be able to recontract with that person. When I hired you to teach 35, this is what we wanted. This is what we expected of you. Get CMAS done. Teach a morning meeting.
Damage control. Don't call the office too much for behaviors.
All those kinds of things, like get the job done, right? Which is a very simplistic way. But if I'm going to give you 15, I want to know. I want to be able to walk in and say, tell me about Nestor. And I don't want to know what his CMAS data is or what his last iStation score was. I want to know that you know Nestor. So you won't believe this, Rob, but Nestor's brother just came home from the Army yesterday. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over there and I'm going to interview him, and then I'm going to use that interview to have that student write an article or write an essay. Because with 15 students, that's the kind of relationship you should have with every kid. That's the kind of relationship that once you have it, what we both know will happen. The impact in the learning will happen. It is like just simply the act of saying 15 kids means you'll be able to go home at 3:01 instead of at 4:30 if nothing else changes, right? Yeah. My work-life balance got better. Great teacher. How did their lives change? Yeah. And I think and I don't think that any teacher wouldn't want the same thing.
Yeah.
I think our teachers that are really strong are going to work, whatever it is they're going to work, for 15 or for 35. Your point is well taken. Love is not finite, but time is.
Yep.
And so I can only give so much love in a certain amount of time. So I think what connects for me, and I know this is very analytical compared to where we just were, but one of the things as a leader I also really value, and I work really hard on, is paying attention to my strategic resources, right? Man, and I've had a lot of principals push back on this, so again, I welcome the feedback from others, but I don't believe in me doing lunch duty.
Okay.
Because lunch duty is an act of supervision, doesn't require a lot of emotional investment, or when you're doing it effectively, the opportunity to create deeper relationships. Because I'm doing lunch duty, I'm supervising 100 kids. And in doing that supervision, I've got to keep 100 kids safe and alive. I can't really listen to you, Nestor, and hear about your brother from the Army. Because if I'm doing that, I'm putting other kids at risk.
Yeah.
So what I say is build a system where lunch supervision's happening and then go to lunch every day.
Yeah.
And then sit down. I don't say don't do it, but I said if your goal is to go to lunch, I go there to build relationships. Do you? Because if you're going to do lunch duty, every principal's done it. I'm not having relational conversations with kids. I'm not that good. Maybe there's principals who are all, but I'm not. If my paraprofessionals are supervising effectively, I can go play tetherball with the kiddo who was in my office 2 days ago and build that relationship and talk to him about showing the value of perseverance or showing the value of harmony and then go practice it with him. And I've got a friend for life.
Yeah.
But if all I have time to do is, you're doing better today, and then run on to the next thing, he doesn't feel heard.
No, it's damage control.
And so that strategic resources is I learned this at the fellowship I did with Yuri. And so there's this quote from, we go to Gettysburg for this event, and you learn all about the generals during that battle. And one of the guys in the thing went out, and he thought he was being a badass. So he went out and he led the charge. General leads the charge, and in the first 90 seconds, he gets shot in the head and dies. And then because he's not there to lead, they get wiped out. So what the person says in reflection on this, one of the other generals, is like, only do what only you can do, right? So if a paraprofessional can do lunch supervision, then why would I do it? Because there's things that only I can do that I need to be doing. So when you're looking at your team, are they only doing what only they can do? Mm-hmm. And if they're not, what's the consequence of that? Yeah. Right? Well, we need this class covered. We could use combining kids, or we could send the AP. Well, the teachers won't get mad if you send the AP, but then 3 DDI sessions aren't going to happen.
Right, exactly.
That's a tough call. Only do what only you can do. I'm the only one that can do this DDI today. Which one's going to have a bigger impact on kids? DDI. Well, pay the teachers a couple extra hours. Have them cover those classes. We got to get this DDI done. Those are the tough decisions you have to make and when you're strategic resourcing, right? Time is one that I think I have to come reconcile with because this is an equity issue. I have a certain belief about time. The way I always say it is we used to have to wait to get into the parking lot at church when I was growing up because my dad would get there so early that the other mass hadn't let out yet, right? So we're Roman Catholic as well. So like there's a pretty busy community in New York, 7:30 and 8, or 7:30 and 9, at 10:15, 11:30. So we're going to the 10:15. The 9 o'clock hadn't finished yet. So we have to sit in the street and wait for people to come out of church and leave so we could park the car. So on time, belief about time is very, very strict in my upbringing. It's different in some of the communities that I work in, teams, teachers. I have to come to a new understanding of that. But time is the only thing. When was the last time you asked teachers what they needed, that one of the top 3 things wasn't time?
Never.
Yeah?
Never.
It's always. So if you recklessly disregard it, you get what you expect.
Amen. I don't believe in time management. Time management is life management. Another quote that I read, like there is no downtime, there is no free time. The only thing you got is lifetime. That's all you got, man. Mm-hmm. So, I'm the same with regards to how a strategy. I'm an athlete. I don't know if I shared this with you, but I do competitive races all the time, and I have 2 boys at home, and so my time is absolutely precious. And I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and do all my things. And that's one of the things that teachers always regard as one of the most precious resources they have. Going back to the idea of small class sizes, you will have different conversations with teachers when you renegotiate the contract, when you recontract them, and you start asking questions about kids that you don't even think about asking them right now, like your brother coming from the military, or allowing teachers to develop a curriculum where kids explore themselves and write an essay about what I want to be. Like most kids go through 16 years of public education and never once write about themselves, or never once explore their gifts or their talents, or talk about each other in a way that is constructive. So I'm ready for those changes, man. That's one of the things that if I could see, if my eyes could see, instead of shutting down buildings, relocating resources to those buildings, and now that we have more classrooms. And
I think that's a great idea. I think that's the way to think about it, right? It's like, if we're going to do hard things, how does it create good things?
That's it. Oh my God, that's the best way to say it.
Do you think, part of the thing I think about, like, this comes to small class sizes, about a little bit more freedom, is one of the things I'm always surprised by, at least at my school and in my experience, is like, I always remember, like, when a kindergartner comes to Newland, maybe in the first 6 weeks even, and they're late, somebody will inevitably say, like, I'll go walk them down. And I'm like, have you asked them if they know where the room is yet? No. I'm like, can we do that first, please? Why? Because if they know, honor them and let them go. What if they can't find it? I go, they're inside a school. Someone's going to help them. But what if they get lost? how would that happen exactly? Like, they're not going to leave.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that, like, in an institution where we're trying to build empowered humans, we so frequently take away in, like, risk or like, I don't know what it was. It was like someone wanted to get something, like, well, I'm gonna have to go to the closet and get them. Like, what's wrong with this guy right here? She's like, he's only in 3rd grade. I'm like, it's a ream of paper. Let's see what he does. And it's those little things that I don't think they translate even less frequently into the classroom. Mm-hmm. Do you have any challenges with that here as a leader? Like, just let them try. Like, please let them try. Before you decide what they can't do, can we at least let them try? Have you seen that?
No, actually, not that
Good.
often.
Good.
My secretaries are pretty good at, they know the kids very well.
Okay.
So we actually walk to the rooms the ones that will take a 15-minute bathroom break on the way to the classroom.
That's a different story to a certain extent.
And they're typically the older ones too, like the 4th, 5th grades students. Those are the ones that go to the 30 bathrooms that are on the way to the room. So those ones we typically hold accountable by walking them. But everybody else,
they're pretty good about
they
that.
They come, check in, they know the rooms, and that works properly. But man, it is true that there are so many things in this educational system that I would love to see change as it relates to humanizing the learning, I guess. I'm just trying to see how can I say it in a way that is appealing, that captures the eye. It's okay to learn about frogs and rainforest. I think it's cool to learn experiments about baking soda and things blowing up and building volcanoes, but man, knowing about the caloric value of a bar that you just ate for breakfast, I think that's more useful. Or learning about what are the 5 things that you are really good at and that you enjoy doing as a 9-year-old. Like, how can you reflect on those as indicators of what you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. There are so many things in the way we teach our kids, like the reality, the challenges that our kids and their families go through do not match the content they are learning in the classroom in a way that is useful and transferable immediately. We talk about math, we talk about literacy, critical thinking skills, mathematical, conceptual understanding, and procedural understandings. Yes, all those things are useful, but there are so many more things that we could be talking in the classroom that would allow kids to have a better conversation with mom and dad when they get home, that would allow them to be more generous with themselves, more compassionate. And it doesn't have to be a social emotional curriculum for 20 minutes in the morning and then the rest of, CKLA. I'm just thinking of how can we integrate, harmonize the needs. How can we backwards plan from the society we want to have in 25 years? Do we want people eating healthier, having more mature relationships with each other, doing better with their money, being more trustful with their partner? Like, how do we want the future 30-year-olds in the next generation to behave? And then let's put that in the classroom. I think we need to know, obviously, about the tundra and the Arctic and the Antarctic and the equator. But can you just learn that when you're 35, if you care? Shouldn't you learn about things that, even if you don't care, will change your life forever? But I don't... Do you understand?
I do, and what I would say is I would think it's a yes and, right? So if we're learning about people, we can talk about how they related to each other and what we like about it and what we don't, perhaps. I think that the emotion needs to be attached to content or to concepts. Mm-hmm. So how can we show that the relationship between Columbus and the Native, not like we're talking, I just read an article in Chuck, like how they were celebrating DPS for taking Columbus out of the curriculum. Uh-huh. And I would, again, be open to that conversation on a feedback level. But wouldn't it be nice if, to get to that idea of like how we love and care for each other, is to express like, what did Columbus not demonstrate that the Native Americans would have appreciated, right? And say, what was absent? What were the emotions? What was the relationship like? And why was it like that? What would you do differently? And why would you do it differently? Because I think then you still get what's going on, but then you have them think a little bit more deeply. Well, if I want to be different when I get to be an adult, I have to remember the lesson learned about what I didn't like about what he did back then. So I think you attach those experiences or the new way you want people to be to why it's different than the past. I think that's a way to maybe bridge those a little bit. Mm-hmm. The trick is going to be being careful about how you do that. Yeah. So when you think about the way we're set up as elementary schools now, at Newland, we do 30 minutes of morning meeting in the morning, and we do 15 minutes of closing meeting at the end of the day. But one of the things we also try to do, and we have varied levels of success because it's hard, is like, I always call them content language value objectives. Right? So like content language objective, I'm not going to bore people because anyone who's going to listen to this is going to know what those are. But if we said like, you're going to do this thing, learn how to add 2 and 2, and use these words to do it, and use this language to do it, that's great. And then you say, and demonstrate the value of harmony by collaborating with your partner to complete the worksheet.
Oh, gosh.
And you'll know you've done it when you share answers and you give each other feedback. I think that's, now again, for the classroom teacher who just heard that, they're like, no way, I can't even get content language objectives done. My argument over time is by having that values objective, content language objectives will more likely happen. Because the kids don't just know what to do and how to talk about it or how to have language for it. They kind of know why they're doing it, to build a relationship or to be like, again, I'm using our schools, but to be curious about it, right? To be empowered. Like you're writing about the document about human rights and about Esperanza's experience so you can see an example of empowerment. Be talking about that with your classmate. So I think having that values piece as the lesson objective itself is how you do what I think you're describing. It's like, if we want people to be a certain way, then we got to teach them how to do it. Not just, look, you and I don't get up every morning and go, I'm going to be a good person today. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, was I a good person? Mm-hmm. We have a process, both of us, is when we have conversations with the people we work with. How am I doing in honoring my own values in the conversation I'm having? We have an objective when we go. We plan our meetings too, right? We plan our conversations. So why not teach kids that too?
100%.
Right? So I think it is the stringing. Social emotional learning is only valuable if it's not isolated, which when we started 6 years ago when we were in the Wallace Grant, it was morning meeting, closing meeting. But that was skills development. Once you learn the skill, when are you practicing it?
100%.
Right?
Man, I really don't want this conversation to end.
I really enjoy this time.
So much fun. So much to learn from you.
Yeah.
Definitely one of my favorite episodes ever. Before we wrap up, do you have any message you want to share with anybody in the audience that might not be yet a school leader but wants to jump in and follow in footsteps of people like you?
I would just echo some of the things you've kind of shared today. Is like I really do think it's how valuable it can be. The better you know yourself, the better you know who you are, and maybe as importantly, who you want to be. That's the biggest kind of iterative circle you need to keep going around as you develop leadership qualities. If you know your own values, all leadership will attach to your values. And so I think the better you know yourself, the easier it will be to execute on leadership tasks or skills because your values will drive them.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much. I think this deserves a 2.0 version. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was fun.
Time flew, man.
I know. How long was that?
An hour and a half.
Really? So special. Thank you so much. I am...